Great stuff there. Thanks for all your thoughts. We want to move on now to a segment on the show that we call Start, Sub, or Sit. For those potentially listening for the first time, we're going to give you three options around a topic, ask you to start one of them, sub one of them, and sit one of them, and then we will have a fun discussion from there. So, Coach, if you're ready, you have not heard these, ready to dive into this first one?
I'm ready.
Okay. This first one we've kind of turned outer third pick and roll chess against, and then we'll take it one step further. So when you're trying to get to an outer third pick and roll, an empty outer third, excuse me, pick and roll, and the team on defense is got someone who's in really great drop coverage. These are three things that you be mindful of that you're trying to do to basically defeat that outer third drop coverage. So three different things that you'd be thinking about. So option one is moving that big or moving the defender pre outer third pick and roll. So maybe you screen them, maybe you have some kind of action that makes it so it's harder for them to get to that perfect drop position. So you're moving that big pre screen. That's option one. Option two is you're figuring out how to move the nail defender or someone trying to plug from that middle on that outer third pick and roll, trying to clear the nail. Or option three is trying to move or confuse the bottom tag, the MIG, whoever it is that's at the rim. So you're trying to move them some way, somehow. So the three options on trying to make that outer third pick and roll better, moving the big pre-screen, moving the nail defender, or moving the bottom tag.
So I'd start with moving the nail defender.
Okay.
I would sub the tag, and I would sit the moving the big into the screen.
Okay. Coach, let's just start with your start. Why do you feel it's so important to move that nail defender in an outer third pick and roll?
Spacing, pretty simple. I think it allows for a lot of different things, especially, whether that outer third pick and roll is being iced as a drop or whether it's being sent to the middle in a drop. I think clearing that nail opens up opportunities for either your big or that guard that's in the slot. And I think what's happening now is teams are becoming very, very good at clogging and taking away space. And, great guards can make those decisions to find space. And so our job as a coach is to try and help them get as much space as they can and then be able to make that decision. So for me, clearing that nail is a really important place for keeping guards from, and in some ways playing in crowds and being able to make early decisions and then force rotation on the defense.
For sure. Uh, Pat, did you want to jump in or do you want me to?
I just had a follow up on the
Yeah,
nail.
go ahead.
Yeah, coach, how are you? Well, I guess who are you going to cut in terms of trying to free that nail, or how are you thinking about freeing that nail?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can do. You can just basically cut, and then where do you want to exit, right? Do you want to exit strong side? Do you want to exit? Do you want to turn that empty side into a filled side, depending on how quickly you cut through? I mean, again, some of that I think is scout based. And then, are you flaring? Are you hammering or jacking that Igor Kokoshkov used to call it on that side? Are you pinning down? Like what kind of actions do you think you want to use to punish? And I think that's where your scouting is really good. Like a lot of times we focus in on scouting on the defensive end of the floor, but how good we be at really understanding where weaknesses is or where that weakness is when we clear the nail and how do we want to attack it? And then again, do you have enough time to prep that? But those are also some kind of unique things that you can do to attack that nail. So I don't think there's one way.
Yeah.
Um, but certainly engaging that nail defender and making them make decisions is important.
Coach, what would be the considerations if you want to use a screen? Is it basically, would it be based on what player is in kind of that slot or who's, the skill of that player? Or I guess what makes you think when you scout the defense that let's use some hammer action on that side to get that nail free or to punish the nail defenders for sitting there?
Again, I think a lot of it is personnel based for sure,
Mhm.
because you may not even want to get it to the hammer or to the flare. You may want to get it to your big at the elbow and play through the big. So it just forces an opportunity to get that catch there and play through the nail, or play through the elbow. So I think there's a lot of different things to consider on why. I'm not sure there's like one answer.
Yeah.
Um, some of that is personnel based too.
Yeah. Coach, uh, when you're the big in this, when you're facing a defense that has a big that's particularly good in drop coverage, ice, whatever you want to call it, whether they're sending it middle or like you said, like icing it or downing it, going into that game, I guess with your team, with your staff, how are you thinking about trying to move that, big, trying to attack them, trying to just confuse coverages? If you know you're going to go against someone that's pretty darn good at being in those spots and making it hard to score at the rim, what's an overall, I guess, philosophy on trying to attack a good drop coverage big?
Yeah, I think some of it is really, again, what can you do to challenge that big at the point of the screen when they're dropped, right? So can you flip it? Can you hostage dribble and then Gortat it? Because still in FIBA game, I know in the NBA they tried to clean that up a little bit and started calling more illegal screening. That's not happening in the FIBA game. You can run interference on the big. So really trying to manipulate timing, um, and being able to try again, really think about creating space so that you can challenge that big in different ways. I mean, the easy ways are, try and draw them and throw it over the top for a lob, but you may not have a lob catcher, right? Can you hit the short pocket and then cut off the weak side? But I think sometimes really thinking about how you can mess up timing of that drop big, because timing is such an important piece of being a good drop big. So how can we change that timing of how they have to, react to a particular guard coming downhill or snaking?
For sure.
Coach, when trying to, yeah, mess with the timing of the big or, attack a drop big, what are you telling the big man in terms of their role, or the big man and the guard, like trying to get the big to roll out in front of the guard or trying to roll with, in the same plane as the guard to really put that drop big into a decision if we're taking out the Gortat screen, let's say.
Yeah, I think that's again, I mean, that's really where you got to have like just good feel with your bigs as well. I try not to overcoach those types of concepts. You try to
Mhm.
make people understand, hey, where your advantage is. But I think pick and roll is a little bit of a relationship, and no two players are the same in pick and roll. Some guards are a little bit antsy, they want to get rid of it quick. Some have a little bit more patience. Some bigs want to demand the ball early. So I think it's just getting a lot of reps in the action and allowing them to figure it out more than necessarily it being prescribed. Like I think it's really important for them to understand what their options are or where they can gain advantage.
Mhm.
If possible, can we apply a term to it so it can be a cue and a reminder? But I also think it's important for players to be able to kind of develop that relationship in pick and roll where they understand that, hey, this big's a little bit better at getting out early, or he's just really good at sticking a guy and hitting him, or, like, so I think it's a combination again. I'm not sure there's, at least for me, there's
Mhm.
one certain way that I go about that.
No.
Coach, my last question before the next start sub sip. You've coached in leagues with, as mentioned, Japan that has some really good bigs, and then you might be playing two or three smaller guards with those bigs. And if those bigs are dropping, you've got smaller guards getting in the paint. Um, for those of us that coach smaller guards, any teaching points on helping a guard navigate, when they're in the teeth of the defense and a big is dropping, whether you want them to play off two, allow them to shoot a short floater, or like be patient. Like as you've coached, I'm sure a lot of guards in those situations. Anything there from that standpoint?
Yeah, I think this is, I would say this is the separator from elite guards, is their ability to navigate deep in traffic, right? To be able to make those deep decisions. So the first thing is, what level of guard am I working with? Because the first thing might be, listen, don't put yourself into that situation.
Right.
Don't get deep because you're just not good enough to handle it right now. So, but if you do get deep, all the things that you talked about, right? Staying balanced on 2 feet, having the ability to get a floater when you need, because sometimes that's the difference between a turnover. Like a lot of times, maybe coaches don't love the floater, but what's the end result if you don't take the floater? You're now in a crowd. So sometimes that's the best option purely because it avoids making high risk passes in traffic for smaller guards, especially. And then being able to kind of hopefully rep them enough where they understand that, where can they get the angle that they need to make the play that they need. I'm not big about getting in the air and making decisions, especially if you're small, but that armpit pass, that wraparound pass that I had many a conversation about when I was in Sacramento. That can be a useful tool to teach a guard. But the key thing is, yeah, how do they get better at navigating that space? And that's a challenging one because you don't necessarily want to create that too often in practice while you're right. So in player development, maybe you touch on it, you drill it, maybe you can show some film about that. Um, but again, that's the separator for great guards, in my opinion.
Absolutely. All right, Pat.
All right, coach, keeping it moving here. Our last start subset, we're going to stay on the offensive end and we're going to look at baseline out of bound design and kind of with the focus being on if you're going to run one or two alignments and your baseline out of bounds, how you would think about really randomizing the actions within let's say one alignment. So start subset, your start being what you think would be the most useful in randomizing the the variations within it. Would it be designating who goes first in terms of makes the first decision and then all the decisions kind of cascade off of that? Would it be option number two, shuffling the spots? So the same alignment, but now you're going to put different, players in different spots of that alignment? Or option three, would it just really be getting more dynamic in your screen in terms of screen versus slip decisions and not always, demanding it's a screen, maybe it's a slip out, but varying how you screen or yeah, the type of screen.
Yeah, say those three again for me. How I gotta
Yeah,
absorb.
no problem. So would it be option one, kind of designating this spot always starts the decision making process? So based off of their decision, all the other decisions kind of cascade. Option two, would it be shuffling the players in the alignment? So maybe it was the one this time, maybe it's the four, maybe it's the three, so to speak.
Yeah.
Or option three, would it basically just screen versus slipping and getting more like trying to get sometimes more cutting to the rim versus setting a screen?
So I would start option one,
Okay.
uh, which is starting with the same kind of, you know, the player movement.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I would I would sit number two,
Okay.
um, because I think sometimes that just naturally happens a little bit anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I can talk about that as well. And then I would sub number three, which is the screening slipping.
Yeah. Coach, maybe just my we start a little bit broadly before we go back in on your answers. But when you do think about, I guess, the decisions over playing several alignments, having like let's say a deep playbook of baseline out of bounds versus, yeah, like maybe just working out a one or two and just trying to get really good in those and create the randomization.
So, so I'll start by sharing this when it comes to baseline out of bounds. For a large chunk of my career, that was like the last thing I worried about. I would give it to my assistants. It was just another thing that I had to think about that I thought, okay, you know what? I didn't value it as enough as I needed to. And last season in Kill, we were bad 2 years ago. Last season, I said, hey, I gotta get more, I gotta take more ownership of this. And because I've always had a couple of thoughts on baseline out of bounds. So I'll share this. The way I look at a baseline out of bounds is like a set piece in soccer. So in soccer, you have a corner kick, you have a free kick. Those are scoring opportunities. And in general, in soccer or football, the goal is to score off the first pass. Maybe you get a bounce, you might get the second, um, but you're trying to score. So I look at sideline out of bounds and baseline out of bounds as set pieces, the same way that you would look at as a free kick or a corner kick in soccer. We're trying to score in the first two passes if we can. Um, So I think there's approximately 5 to 7 baseline out of bounds. Again, 4 to 8, maybe a baseline out of bounds in a FIBA game. And for me, really diving into this, it became pretty clear that these are really valuable possessions. So when we look at a baseline out of bounds, the first thing we're trying to do is create an advantage, a quick advantage where we can get a shot. If that shot's open, we're going to take that shot. And if that shot's not open, where's the second pass going? Is that another scoring opportunity? So we're really trying to get our best scoring opportunities in the first two passes. And that's where we're also trying to defend the first two passes. If you defend the first two passes, it almost becomes half court action to some.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start with that. That's kind of where I look at it. And then then the design is really probably one formation, maybe two. And then I think the key thing in that is how do you communicate, right? It's a small thing. Some teams use play cards. Some guy may have his assistant be the one who signals. We huddled a lot last year in Japan, and the refs let us get away with quick huddles. In FIBA this summer, the refs wouldn't let us get away with quick huddles. So, like, we're just trying to make sure that out of that formation, that the defense is a little bit on their heels, not knowing what's coming, so that we can get that small advantage that might get us that first shot within the first two passes, and then we'll roll from there. So we may have 3 or 4 options out of the one formation, and that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. And Coach, I loved your thoughts there. When looking at like having a second scoring opportunity, that second pass and trying to generate scoring opportunities off that second pass, I guess what are like the options you think about in that first option that set you up in a good position to have a second scoring option if that first one isn't there?
So I think number one is who, right? Who are you getting the ball to? Is he
Mm-hmm.
capable of executing what you want to execute, or her? And then two, area of the floor. Where do you want that point of attack to come from, right? Do you
Mm-hmm.
want it in the middle third? Do you want it in another third? Do you want it at the 45? Do you want it in the low post? Where are you trying to put the ball um, for that secondary action if you can't score out of the primary action? And last season in Kyoto, we were actually much better out of the secondary action than the primary action. Like that first catch, we just didn't really look to shoot it as much as I would have liked, but we were very, very good in the second pass or action or whatever you want to call it that got us that great look or that score at the rim.
No.
Coach, your sub, screen versus slip, teaching points or thoughts on, when you want and how you want those things to be randomized. Obviously, like if you're able to stick a screen, great. But randomizing, slipping, and filling gaps in a baseline out of bounds versus actually screening.
Yeah, again, I think that one's a little bit more like of an art form than it is necessary, right? When we talk about randomness, well, how do you teach randomness? I still think about that a lot. Is that
Yeah.
actually something that you can do? Like, you can emphasize, you can illustrate, you can encourage, but if it's random, then it's random. So it's again becomes about communication with players. Sometimes that communication can be verbal. Often it's just body language. It's just maybe a nod, it may be a wink, whatever that is. Sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it's just reading the coverage that's in front of you. So I think it's really more about just repetition, giving them as many opportunities to repeat those types of actions within a breakdown drill, within a practice, maybe in player development,
Yeah.
so that they have, again, a relationship to be able to exploit that, whatever the defense gives them, and punish that with, either a slip or a really good screen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. When when a team comes out in a zone of some sort on underneath out of bounds, uh, do you want totally different alignments against a zone? Do you like an alignment that can attack a man or a zone and just teach how to attack those differently? If a team is kind of junking it up underneath defensively, how do you still think about being like aggressive?
Yeah, well, certainly, I think there's value in having something for the zone. And sometimes it's useful to attack the zone, but also sometimes it's good for your players to always know that you have a solution for them, to at least to make an attempt at maybe a defensive adjustment that a team makes, and now you're running your base actions and you're struggling with it and you don't have anything, it's always nice to know that your team knows that you have potentially a solution for them. So it's always nice to have something against the zone. And then really, I mean, it's, what are you confident is going to work? And do you want to use that right away? When do you want to use that? So I always have something for a zone or something for junk, but it may not be something that we rep as often as we would our base formations.
If I could just drill down for one more question on the zone. When you're going against a zone underneath out of bounds, and you said, having some stuff for it, without giving away all the secret sauce, I guess, are you looking at attacking or screening like interior defenders for slip opportunities, overloads? Like, what is a way that I guess, like you think about attacking a zone?
I think probably the thing that I've done historically the most that I've stolen from, lots of other coaches is really trying to screen the interior of the zone, right? There's nothing more deflating than when you go zone and then you give up a layup at the rim or a little jump shot in the gap because you've slid down and banged, or maybe it's reverse it out and then, come off for a three. And like there's impact of particular, we know that as coaches. Somebody gets it, you go zone on a baseline out of bounds, somebody gets a dunk, you're kind of feeling, do I stay in that zone? Or, like they
Yeah,
just have more emotional impact on us. In the end, it's another 2 points. But, those types of plays, I think, have value.
for sure. Oh,
Coach,
Coach. Yeah, go ahead,
sorry,
Pat.
Coach, my last question. You sat shuffling the lineup, and you mentioned sometimes it maybe over the course of the season is going to kind of happen naturally, but I guess in general, kind of, there's no, like, I'm sure you never don't do it, but having more positional familiarity, maybe, guys are going to play two, maximum three spots within this lineup versus really having it 1 through 5 interchangeable and randomizing that way.
Yeah, again, I just share kind of why I said I would sit that, and I think it happens organically, especially when you have higher level players, right? When you have professional level players, they're going to figure out sometimes, hey, let's get him the ball, or if he's an alpha, he might figure out, hey, I want to get the ball. So they'll naturally start to shift their positions around, maybe at critical times in games. And this is part of coaching at the professional levels. You got to trust your guys. You got to let them kind of figure it out at times as well. Sometimes it doesn't work, but we don't necessarily always have maybe the measure of control that we'd like. But sometimes it's very powerful to be able to give up that control. So that's why I say eventually, as you start to get through a season, in particular situations, short clock maybe, or they have a mismatch on a post player. Players themselves will start to manipulate where they are because they're just so drilled and well, they know it's only 3 or 4 options that you have out of one formation. So they can kind of figure that out as well. And I've seen that happen more and more as well.